Welcome, dear listeners, dear friends. Welcome to yet another episode of Roll Off a Tangent. Today we have drawn another tale from the treasure trove that is Weird Tales magazine. The Conquering Wheel starts off with a foreword of unknown authorship describing the account of one Gordon Paige, since deceased. We open this manuscript with a philosophical question. What is a soul? What makes someone a unique individual, a precious flower full of his or her own hopes and dreams? At the time of writing, the manuscript's penner, Malcolm Ray, bade a fond farewell to Jane Cavanaugh in the railway station of their town of Radford. Malcolm is traveling all the way to the Northwestern wilderness of Canada. A prospector had unearthed a vein of precious tungsten, and Malcolm, together with his colleague Dan Murdock, was tasked by the government to investigate, determine its value, and report. He will be gone for a year, and a year is a long separation between lovers. Malcolm comforts Jane, promising his safe return and marriage after. Malcolm boards the train, leaving a tearful Jane behind. Our narrator met the prospector, a shriveled, weary man by the name of Norton, at the end of the train ride. He led them through a difficult terrain of waterways, winding through canyons and untouched forests. A month had gone by since their forays into the untamed Canadian wilds, and the trek had only become ever more toilsome. Just a day before their journey to the tungsten mine finally ends, our heroes met with tragedy. The river they followed had narrowed between two cliffs, and the waters now spat through that opening with perilous, unbridled fury. It was exceedingly dangerous to continue, but they had no choice. They set their canoes onto the rapids. Within moments, they were borne away by fierce currents. The humble vessel was flung about by the powerful waters. A rock seemingly appeared out of nowhere in their path, and in a desperate attempt to steer the canoe, our protagonist lost control of the craft and they capsized. Malcolm survived somehow at the cost of a shattered leg. Norton and Dan were not so lucky and died. Or perhaps they were the lucky ones, for how could one crippled man, alone with neither food nor shelter and hundreds of miles away from civilization, hope to survive? Our narrator had thought to die, to throw himself into the rapids and spare himself the misery, but his will to live is strong. He put himself together and found Norton's cabin in the wilds nearby. The sight lifted his spirits, and he dragged himself into the structure before passing out from the sheer agony of doing so with a broken leg. The following morning yielded even darker news, for the cabin was empty of provisions. The following days were a grueling account as the narrator slowly starved. As he drifted in and out of a delirium brought on by his broken leg and hunger, the one thought that helped him cling on to life was Jane. Each time he sank into the darkness, visions of her luminous, beautiful countenance would bring him back from the brink. Cold, pain, and hunger ground against his will inexorably, until one day, Malcolm woke to a fire that had gone out, but found that he was not cold. He tried to rise, but his body did not respond, and that was when he knew he had died. Or at least his body had ceased to live. His will, spirit, soul, whatever it was that continued thinking, feeling, and dreaming is still very much present. His perception had sharpened, and it seemed as if all of his being were concentrated into one desire, to see Jane once more and tell her he yet lived. As days passed, Malcolm watched as his body was torn apart by scavengers, yet his yearning for Jane only grew stronger. Unable to bear sight of his body destroyed, his spirit was flung across time and space into the wake of his old friend, Gordon Paige. Gordon had passed away a short time ago, and his death had drawn Malcolm's will. Exercising some instinct he now possessed in his new state, Malcolm channeled all his will towards Gordon's body and took over it. Our narrator had been given a second chance, and he made full use of it. He reunited with Jane as Gordon Paige, and they married eventually. To Jane and the rest of the world, he was now Gordon Paige, but inside, he was still Malcolm Ray. All
Dun
right.
dun dun.
Okay, so that is our lucky draw from the Weird Tales Treasury, and I will hand it off to my colleagues Nikki and uh, Rob to tell us first what they think of it. So, Nikki,
Hmm.
would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, no problem at all. So, this is a very different tale in some aspects when it comes to the first story that we reviewed from the Weird Tales. However, it also has a lot of similarities to it. There's the wilderness, the strange and uncanny coming closer to the end of the story, characters having delirium and losing their faculties due to disease and injury. There are um, elements that you can combine between the two and see for yourself that, this um, could be in the same genre, or at least they borrow some aspects from one another. However, The Conquering Will is different in two very distinctive ways. First of all, the type of writing. This is not a tale that is written from the first perspective, akin to a monologue. This is first perspective of an individual with mostly narration, right? So that way it is different. And secondly, this tale jumps completely into the deep end of mystery and mysticism. And I think it's better for it. I really enjoyed the tale, and I enjoyed it because at a certain point there was an understanding between me and the author that we are moving away from reality, and now we're in some very different type of a situation. Um, One of the biggest issues I think my colleagues and I had with The Ghoul and the Corpse was that it tried to be a what if story, trying to be scientific in some manner, um, making parallels with the science of the day, right, 100 years ago, and it kind of fell flat for us in that design. But here, because there is no such requirement for it to fit into something that we all know to be true for any scientific theory to be proven. This tale goes into a very interesting direction, and we have the protagonist not only swap bodies but swap destinies and sort of live in this um, different world in which he has to pretend to be somebody else. And honestly, that morsel, that idea that we could have explored that makes me very sad that this tale is 7 pages. Because I think it would be much more interesting if we spent less on the premise and more on what would that entail for an individual. Can you imagine that you now have to live a completely different life, trying to remember who those people were? Everyone thinks that you're this new guy, and they all have relationships with you, and they have friendships, and you've got a job. What if you were a philosopher, and this guy's a mechanic, and you have to somehow, in some way, propagate that you either are changing careers or you have to fake it till you make it? That sounds to me much more interesting um, than spending most of the time on the depth of the character. But that is just my own musings, right? Still, the tale is really strong. It has a lot of interesting aspects, and the scene in the cabin where life was slowly draining away from our main protagonist was so vivid that I felt the sadness. I felt the feeling of someone's essence slipping away. It was very, very well written. There you go. Those are my uh, long and short thoughts on the story. I might have more to add, but that's it for now. What about Robert?
I agree with just for once. I agree with everything you say, every word you say, uh,
I
and
mean, miracles do happen.
yeah,
Carry on.
yeah. Now, what I all I can say to branch off from that is just to perhaps compare this tale of metempsychosis or transmigration of soul at death with other metempsychosis stories. For example, Edgar Allan Poe's Ligeia, which was the one that sprang to mind immediately. I read this one. Only with Ligeia, it's fairly sinister and, if not downright evil, I'm not sure which. Whereas this one feels it contributes to a reasonably happy ending for the tale. Another another story which I really like on the metempsychosis front is Eric Frank Russell's Eternal Rediffusion, which I'm not sure, it may have also appeared in Weird Tales, I can't remember. Anyway, it's takes it further that the souls, just all souls, whether they've got conquering wills or not, at death get scattered about into other bodies somewhere in the galaxy. So you might be a man in one life and then a frog-like being on some interstellar planet in the next one. Those are kind of what I might call involuntary metempsychosis. And then, of course, there's a quite larger genre or subgenre of when it's done deliberately. So, for example, in John Wyndham's novella Pillar to Post, where somebody uh, in a home for the he's some seriously ill guy is exchanging bodies with someone in the future who has come to investigate his own past, and uh, he tries to rig up machines so that he can stay that way because he prefers living in the future to living in his own time and so on. And it becomes a tussle between the two of them. And then there's H.P. Lovecraft's stories, The Shadow After Time, and The Thing on the Doorstep, macabre treatments, and also Lee Brackett's The Secret of Sinharat, which is another
You're
determined.
comparing this. You're
Yeah,
comparing this tale to quite a lot of really esteemed authors. Is that
yeah.
your opinion of the tale on its? I know it's short, but do you
I
say
think I
are
have
you
a high
saying that
opinion
it's?
of it. Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
high opinion of it. I think it's as well written as it could be for the kind of story it is. Um, and I also think that it's an upbeat story, despite the horrors that this chap Malcolm has to go through before he dies. In a way, it's all made up for. At least one hopes one can say that when he is allowed to live his second life.
Yeah,
Um,
he is the only man in the known universe of that world, at least, or maybe not, but we don't know, right? In the story, that gets to live twice, and gets to die therefore twice.
yes, yes, there is that. It's like the story of Lazarus in the New Testament. You're supposed to think what a good thing it was that he was brought to life, but of course it means he has to die twice.
Hmm.
So not
Indeed.
that's not so good. Um,
Yeah. You have to give and you have to take, I guess.
yes.
What about you, actually? What do you think about the story?
So like both of you, I think for a potluck lucky draw from like a random pick from a magazine, this is pretty high quality stuff. And I'm starting to wonder if all of Weird Tales have this quality of writing, or it's just our RNG was very good. And I am very keen to find out if the quality of the tales in the magazines are just, that polished, really. Before I go any further though, so what was the term that you used, Rob, to describe this
Metempsychosis.
metem
Yes,
psychosis?
METEM and then psychosis.
What does that mean?
The transmigration of souls at death. So
So
when you die, your soul hops into another existence.
so it sounds like this is a pretty common genre of theme, not genre, really.
Yeah,
Is
it's
that a common theme?
It's not that common in the particular sense in which we've just read about somebody dying and just happening to time it just right so that he could enter the body of another chap who's died. It's like the only other example I can think of is Edgar Allan Poe's Ligeia, where somebody marries a woman and she dies, and then he marries another woman. Well, actually,
I mean,
it's
in the same genre as most mind swap stories. Only in this one, the person has to die before they swap their minds. In George R. R. Martin's work, there's a lot of that mind swapping type of stuff, including the wargs, I believe they're called, in the Song of Ice and Fire, where they're able to go into either different people or animals, right? And in one particular chapter, one of such wargs dies, and they stay in the wolf, right?
Okay.
After they die.
So
So
the idea of some other will entering another body is a common enough theme in Western literature, I suppose.
well, I think it comes from the fact that individuals such as us, we are finite, and a lot of writing is made by individuals such as us, and it's very common for someone to think about, like, well, how do I cheat death? I can't cheat death in real life, but I could come up with something in writing, right? That could cheat death. So I think cheating death in many myriad ways is a very common trope. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, the reason I asked that is actually, so my highlight of the story, like probably the portion that I enjoyed the most, is the very detailed description of the narrator's eventual demise. Like, that portion is really good. I know that comes out sounding really wrong, but
it's written well, is what you mean.
It's written so first of all, it's written really well, and second of all, I gotta give props to the author. Sometimes we write certain things and then it's a very difficult concept, and then we avoid it by just passing over it with a couple of paragraphs, a sentence or two, and then that's it, and we avoid really confronting the details and going down and dirty with the details of it. But here we have pretty much a very long drawn out suffering, not just first of all with the accident, and then there was the broken leg, and then there's the pain and the hunger and the cold, and then there is the tearing apart of the body by scavengers and stuff like that. And so that sequence of event, that portion, that writing was, as Nikki had said, very vivid, and it didn't shy away from confronting the horror of it from the perspective of the narrator. And the author, like the actual author, not Malcolm Ray, also did not shy away from from getting into the shoes of the protagonist and conveying how he felt about it. That's it. It's interesting to me because this is a bit like an Asian ghost story. Like we have possession is a fairly common trope as well in older Asian ghost stories. But another very common theme is a spirit that is so so right now I have the Chinese term inside my head, and then like it's clashing with the with my English channel. A spirit that has unfinished business and is still very strongly attached to the living world. That is a very common theme in ghost stories from Asia, actually. And then usually the stories don't come to a good end because people who have passed through the afterlife, when they come back changed. They're different, and they're different in a very eerie way, and their sense of right and wrong is completely warped, and whatever they are back to do usually happens in the most in pretty horrific ways. So yeah, that particular section reminds me a lot on Asian ghost stories, really. Yeah.
Do you think this concept of that it goes the wrong way and that you change for the worse when you come back to life, do you think could that be a coping mechanism of a society to say, well, yeah, of course everyone wants to come back to life, but it could go really wrong if you do?
I think that's a very interesting question you ask. I don't have a ready answer for it. I felt the same. So going back to The Witcher, the story about the Bloody Baron and his unborn child, like the entire law behind it. I don't know. What do they call the kid that comes back?
You mean
The
the
monster,
name?
the monster that
The monster?
I can't remember.
I can't either.
But
I must be
it
honest.
really sounds like a folk tale to me. Like whoever if it is an actual Slavic folk tale where you bury the body of an undead not unborn child under the threshold of your door, and then it turns into a guardian angel and stuff like that. And if you don't, then you continue haunting you.
Yeah, that is very Slavic.
Yeah,
The concept itself.
So it like when I was going through that particular quest line, and I was reading the story, I felt this is so folklorish. Like you can squeeze in all the hopes and dreams and fears of peasant life way back when, because I imagine that back then life is hard, and you sometimes you have too many mouths to feed. You don't have enough food, you can't grow enough, and then you have to make the very difficult choice of letting one of your child go, or it was just a stillbirth. And then I imagine that the tremendous guilt that the parents must have felt for having that transpire. And then the guilt probably has some psychological effect, and it makes them feel like they're being haunted by the kid or whatever. And then like the burying dead body under the threshold and then turning it into a guardian angel is probably like a redemption uh, arc of some kind.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's a creation by the folklore in order to make life easier, in order to make really hard decisions easier on the soul.
Yeah,
However terrible that may sound for the child,
yeah,
right? The children and the people that will survive them have to move on at some
yeah,
point.
absolutely. And when I went through that particular quest line, I really felt the life cycle, I suppose, of a peasant way back when in the Slavic countries. And it encapsulates the human struggle within that. So you may be right when you ask me the parallel for uh, the ghost stories. It could be a thing of uh, letting go.
Coping mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a coping mechanism, like letting go, like your life is over, or your loved one's life is over. Just let it go, let them pass on.
Yeah,
Uh,
because if they will come back, they will eat your children or something.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, something like that. So it could well be what you said. Although I
Mm.
haven't really given it much thought. It's not as I gotta say, uh, the mythology behind the Asian ghost stories are not quite doesn't come out quite as strongly as it does for me the Bloody Baron quest line. I have to say,
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
interesting.
Mm. I think this kind of story rather gives up, and the others we've been talking about rather give up on the idea of portraying a really transcendent afterlife. They try, they understandably in pulp fiction and lots of other kinds of fiction, they concentrate on more traditional ghosts, which or revenants of some sort, which are linked to the kind of life we know. And I think that well, I believe in a transcendent afterlife, but I'm just wondering how to reconcile uh, the two kind of images. And I think one can do it if one introduces of the idea that all right, after death we do change, but it happens slowly. I recall reading that in a biography, I think, of Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a keen spiritualist, that he replied to criticisms about seances, critics who said, why are these spirits so dull and boring, and why don't they ever say anything interesting? And he said, well, they aren't that different from people who are still alive. They haven't changed all that much. And I think to myself, well, he might be onto something there. It might be that we change, but very, very slowly. And it reminds me of a beautiful story by Clifford Simek called The Autumn Land, which is about an after death, one assumes it's after death, we're not sure, situation which is you obviously feel it's an acclimatization or a preparation for something infinite, but it's not yet like that. You're just waiting for it to develop. Um, but I suppose all this is rather tangential to the actual story we've been talking about. But it's interesting that there are so many possibilities opening out for anyone who wants to write more on this theme.
One of the aspects of the conquering will, um, you know, kind of encapsulated in the title. I think it's the idea that um, there is a certain theme of resilience in the tale, right? So the man survives an almost impossible accident to live through.
Mm.
Then he finds himself in a very terrible situation and he doesn't give up. and he pushes
Mm.
himself even further through the wilderness with a broken leg. And even after that, he fights and he struggles and struggles and struggles for moments of respite, for a chance to live on, right?
Right.
And it kind of seems like this transcendence into a different body uh, is some sort of a author's reward for both the
Yeah.
reader and the character, that they
Yeah.
have been so resilient to these terrible circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, you have to have the conquering will, otherwise you can't do it. So
Mm.
it's well named story.
So
Yeah.
here's a question to both of you. What if Gordon Paige had still been alive when Malcolm Ray took over his body? How would that change the story?
Become much more sinister. It would be a sort of vampirism in a way, or um, yeah, it would be one soul evicting another or dominating another.
I suppose it depends on how the author would describe it, right? If the author would describe it as this individual that they're taking over, he's done nothing with his life, and he's like alone in his bed, and um, you know, the character is basically knew this individual from the start, and he justifies it in his mind like, oh, this man doesn't deserve this, but I do. I have a goal. I have providence. I have something to offer this world, and this man doesn't, right? then it would be then it would fit the theme of the story. It would fit the theme of the conquering will, right? And
Mm,
the final moment of that being that he takes over someone else's destiny in order to make a better one, right? Because he has been deprived of one. It would still be an evil act, right? But at least it would work within the story. However, if it was described in the case of, I just find a random bed, or I find a bed of a friend of mine who is struggling, and I, do him in so I can take over his body, then I think the tale would have to close with something along the lines of, you know, the person who's reading this ledger is telling us that it's all a lie because he's the third incarnation. He's the third guy who's been taken over. So it's continuing. So this guy sinisterly taking over even more bodies after every other one expires.
mm, yeah, you could go on forever that way.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it depends.
Yeah, so when I read the story, because both of you described it as transcendental, I heard that word more than once. Um, and I thought it seems like a beautiful story to both of you, and to me, when I was reading through it, the first thought really that sprang to mind when I came to the taking over the body part was, what if Gordon Page was still alive? What kind of story would it be? Because to me, the premise isn't that uh, the line between the two in terms of writing a story isn't that uh, difficult to cross, if you know what I mean.
Mm,
Yeah, it's not. It's you at the end of the day, you're still the Malcolm is still taking over somebody. Um, the way the story presents itself, Gordon Page has expired, and so he's up for grabs. You could say, free real estate, unclaimed real estate. You could say, but what if he's not? What if he's still alive? What if he still had his um, own life to lead and stuff like that? Then the story takes a really dark turn, doesn't it?
it does, yes. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Weird tales.
For sure.
In fact, you'd expect it to take a dark turn, so that in this kind of magazine, I should think. So the fact that it doesn't is quite a surprise.
You think so? I might actually say the opposite. I would think that maybe the story did have a different ending, and maybe the editorial had something to do with this, because it is
Oh,
rather a, oh well, he can't be doing this horrible thing. He's the protagonist of the story. Um, have the guy be dying that he's taking over.
Maybe,
Could
maybe
be.
maybe it did go through an editor's pen. Like an editor kind of said, "Yeah, you know what? This is not really PG enough."
hmm.
It depends, it's just because to me it's such a magazine would in some way, shape, or form curate situations. So I feel like it would be more likely that they change something to be more benign than not, right? On the other hand, they were very much interested in um, erotic aspects of a lot of stories. So like a lot of Conan's tales had to have more babes in them, basically, because of the Weird Tales magazine and the Astonishing Science or whatever, wherever he published. There were you literally wrote letters to H.P. Lovecraft, being like, "I can't believe they don't make you do this." You know,
Hmm.
put in some stuff in there,
Hey, but
and
look, that's what gave Frank Frazetta his flair, right? I can't say no to that. More Frank Frazetta
it's
art, please. Right?
it's true. I understand. Yeah, yeah. I'm just saying. I think there is a precedent of the editorial wanting, like strange aspects to be either written in or written out, right? Because to me, actually, um, making it a punchier story could be to its benefit because it's so short. I'm not saying by any means that it's any worse because it has a benign ending. I just rather think if you have so little on the page, you rather want to go with a really big bang at the end? And the bigger the bang, the more malicious something has to transpire, right?
Actually, now thinking about it, perhaps the darker end was the original ending because the author himself didn't shy away from uh, describing in quite in-depth detail the body of Malcolm being eaten by wild dogs.
Yeah,
Yeah, it could be.
but that's physically horrid, but it's not morally horrid, is it? Whereas
Hmm.
um, nicking somebody else's body while they're alive is morally horrid. And I don't think actually that this Malcolm guy was bad enough to do that. He seemed a fairly decent chap.
A, a man does not have to be evil. He must be desperate.
That is so true. All he has to be is desperate. Yeah.
Hmm.
There you
Well,
go. I think that is probably one of the. I have to write that down somewhere. That is probably one of the greatest quotes I've ever made
Yeah, you
on
should.
my own.
Work
Uh,
that into one of your writings somewhere.
that's right.
A
I'll do
man
it.
doesn't have to be evil, he just has to be desperate.
Desperate. Oh, that's a tagline right there. Okay, so coming back to the Conquering Well, I researched, tried to find anything else by Ted Olson. I got a bunch of other authors who went by the same name, but nothing written by the same author. So this is another mystery author for us.
mm,
Um, the previous one in the Ghoul and the Corpse, he had other works that they've written and sent into other magazines. But this is the only tale by Ted Olson. This Ted Olson, the one
mm,
who wrote the Conquering Tale.
that's rather odd.
Hmm. Maybe he was trying to tell us something
It's
with this
yeah,
tale.
he's gone off and body snatched,
Transmigration. Yeah.
body snatched somebody maybe.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Well, cool. Anything else we want to say?
But I do have another theory
Okay.
as to so there are more than a couple of individuals in the Weird Tales library, especially in the earlier years, who have written only one story and then disappeared and never wrote anything again. And here is my conspiracy theory. The Weird Tales magazine was not doing so well when it came to finding individuals to write for them. So in order to make it feel like there's a bigger roster of authors, they started to publish things under names of people who didn't exist. So they had somebody else write it and then say, well, this is Ted Olson, this is so and so and so. Because there are so many instances where something is written in this one magazine by this one author and then he never writes anywhere else and just dissipates from the map. So maybe this is the same conspiracy theory that people speak of when they talk about Shakespeare being like six different people, right? That it wasn't just one guy who wrote it. So maybe the earlier ensemble of Weird Tales consisted of a bunch of people who didn't exist.
Hmm.
Well, I
There you
don't know
go.
if that's a conspiracy theory, as it is like probably a very common thing to write under pen names or to put your to to submit your story under a different name or even ghostwriting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, for instance, Tom Clancy is one person writing his books anymore. I think it's a whole
No.
conglomerate of authors.
I think the letters
Really?
page in these magazines is often by letters sent in by made up people just because they didn't want nobody. Would look bad if you have an empty letters page. So they wrote their own
That is
Could be.
definitely possible.
Yeah.
letters.
It's like bulking up your comment section with bots. Am I right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So do you have a sequel idea for this story, Robert or XJ?
I mean, I have plenty of ideas on how this could continue. Except the
Yeah.
question I ask myself is whether it should continue.
Well, that's not the point of this section of the podcast. It's not nothing to
No,
do with it
but
should or not.
the point of this section of the podcast is how it can be improved.
No, no, it's just to come up with a
Well,
sequel for a fun thing.
the I
Hmm.
honestly, it is kind of like the ghoul and the corpse. I think is great, self-contained, and
Hmm.
sequel would probably either take the original concept off into a completely different direction, or it would water it down somehow, like No Place Like Earth, that
Hmm.
unfortunate John Wyndham story. Yeah,
Hmm.
it feels very neatly wrapped up,
Yeah.
like a
You,
very nice little present with a bow tie.
you could write about the last days of Gordon, the new Gordon Page, who's really Malcolm Ryan. When he in turn comes to die, maybe the original Gordon Page says, right
Hello.
now it's my turn. But of course, it would have to. He'd have to die pretty soon because there's no point in entering the body of an old man.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, what about you, Nikki?
Well, I would sully and destroy this beautiful story's continuity on all on its own in a glorious fashion by making a mid-equal. And it would be the tale of this individual trying to come to grasps with living in this new body that is not his, and what that would mean and what kind of struggles he would have to go through. And it would be both horrific in some aspects and variously comedic in others.
mm,
So to balance out the seriousness of the tale that was presented in us, I would stamp it out and destroy it and turn it into comedy, because I think it's a kind of funny concept of trying to live a life that isn't yours and you kind of have no idea what this person did on a daily basis, right? I think it only works on paper. This premise that he could just take over this body and all be fine. So I think it would be a great opportunity to make some hilarity ensue.
Hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, in practical terms, you could actually do it by coming out with being frank and saying, "Look, I'm suffering from this delusion that I'm Malcolm Ray," you know, and then people would sort of pat him on the head and say, there, you'll get over it, But at least it would prepare them for him not knowing what he should know, being Gordon Page.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think people would swallow it a little bit easier if you just say, "Oh, I have amnesia. I can't remember anything about my previous life." You
Hmm.
know.
So that's not so much a sequel as it is changing or broadening the scope of the story.
Yeah,
Or is it
medieval,
also-
as I said. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, you could write a 6-volume series on it.
I mean,
milk the thing as much as you can, right?
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. But that's it. I don't really have any other thoughts besides that. When it comes to a score, I would give this a solid 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Yeah, that's just what I was going to say. 8 out of 10.
There we go.
A convergence of, well, just to be honorary, I'm going to give it a 7.
Mhm.
That's still
Well,
quite good.
you're so extraordinary, actually.
I know, I'm so different from everyone else.
Yeah, yeah. There's the song about you.
All right, I suppose that's our last word on the story. Pretty decent read. It's like a very pleasant way to pass time, I would say.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice.
Yeah. Hmm.
All right. Well, and with that, we close our discussion on The Conquering Will by, who was it?
Ted Olson.
Ted
Olson.
Olson. Okay. All right. Well, good job, Mr. Ted Olson. If your spirit is still out there, and if you like our discussions and you like the podcast, please like and subscribe and all of that. Until we meet again next week. Take care.
Bye bye.